Hey guys, welcome back to another video here on Toned In Entertainment where we love pop culture. Today, it's time for another movie review. Now when it comes to these newer holiday type movies, either number one, I don't find them interesting enough in the first place to even check out, or number two, if I do watch them, I find them pretty lackluster. There's nothing like going back and watching movies like Jingle All the Way or A Christmas Story, definitely two of my personal favorites. So will a movie about a kid wanting a Nintendo for Christmas totally blow, or will this be the new superstar in the holiday movie genre? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to get on with my review of 8-Bit Christmas, released here in 2021. Now, the majority of this movie is told through flashbacks from the perspective of the character Jake Doyle, played here by Neil Patrick Harris, and he's going to tell the challenges that him and his friends went to, all in order to get their hands on the only thing they all really wanted for Christmas back in 1988, and that was a Nintendo Entertainment System. Now growing up, I think we all knew that one kid that always seemed to get every Nintendo game that always came out. And we always found ourselves over their house trying to play these latest and greatest games. Here in this movie, it's a character by the name of Timmy King. Now he does invite kids over to his house, but he's very selective at which kids he does bring in. But unfortunately, unlike us who actually got to play the games and take turns with these games growing up, Timmy King, he's gonna hog all the games to himself and really just show off all the cool stuff that he has. Now the story takes place here in 1988, and the main character here in this movie, Jake, he's 10 years old, which just happens to be the exact same age I was back in 1988. So for me, this is really just an awesome trip down memory lane. Some of the cool stuff that is referenced here in this movie are Cabbage Patch Kids. Jake's sister is about the same age as my sister, so it really resonated with me to see the parents desperately trying to get their hands also on a Cabbage Patch Kid for their daughter, just like my parents were trying to do for my sister. Plus, there's also cool references like baseball cards. Come on, how awesome was it collecting baseball cards in the 1980s when they were definitely at their height? There's some really cool stuff with them trading cards and wanting to sell them. Man, that just brought back so many great memories. And when we're talking about nostalgia, I have to talk about the music here in this movie. Whether it's licensed music or original scores, man, the music in this movie is totally awesome. Now, while we're taking this trip down memory lane and talking about Nintendo from the 80s, we have to talk about the Power Glove, because this movie didn't forget to talk about it. Man, I can remember the hype for this thing. The commercials that they did for this thing made this thing look so, well, I think I have to quote Lucas from the movie The Wizard, but they made it look so bad. Now, I remember begging my parents to buy this thing for me, but they refused because of the high price tag. But guys, sometimes parents, they do know best. Now, while I never did own a Nintendo Power Glove, I did get to try it out one time at a convention, and I remember just being extremely disappointed. So the commercials and the hype for this thing was very real, but unfortunately, the function for this thing, it wasn't bad. It was just bad, and they perfectly illustrate it in this movie. Now, while the main theme of this movie is about a boy wanting a Nintendo for Christmas and the crazy adventures he had to go on, this movie also definitely takes influences from several other popular movies. Now, the way this story is told definitely reminds me of A Christmas Story. The characters and their personalities and the adventures that they go on definitely feels like it has some influences from the Goonies, and seeing Jake going all crazy, running through the mall, trying to get his hands on that sought after Nintendo definitely has that Jingle All the Way vibe. Again, influences from these movies, but not blatant ripoffs either. Now, I don't want to really spoil anything about this movie, so all I'm going to say is the adventures and situations that these kids find themselves, man, it's just a ton of fun. The dialogue here is so well written, it really feels like this movie is taking place in 1988, and for me, watching a movie that takes place in the 80s, that's very important to me. Plus, all the pop culture references here in this movie, it's gonna have you smiling the entire movie. Well, maybe at the end, because you might actually shed a tear or two when this movie comes to its conclusion. Now, do I recommend the movie 8-Bit Christmas? Absolutely. Even if you weren't a kid that grew up in this time period, there's still a lot of fun to be had here. And if you were a kid that grew up in the 80s and loved playing Nintendo, this movie is a no-brainer. Writer Kevin Jakubowski really understood what type of movie he wanted to write. He really understood the theme and the time period, and it definitely shows. Now, if you want to check out the movie 8-Bit Christmas, well, there's only one place to check it out, as it is an HBO Max exclusive. Now, before I get to my final score, this is something I call story time, because we see here in this movie these kids going through all kinds of crazy things just to get their hands on a Nintendo. So I want to know in the comments below, what crazy thing did you have to do, or how much hard work did you have to put in order to get your hands on the video game system that you always wanted? Luckily for me, for the Nintendo, the original one, I got it for my birthday, and I did get Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with it as my first game. Of course, with Mario and Duck Hunt as well. But for me, the Super Nintendo, that was the thing I really had to really put it all on the line in order to get it, because I was begging my parents for a Super Nintendo, but my parents, they weren't ready to upgrade to another video game system. They used to say, come on, just go ahead, play your Nintendo. You got Tecmo Super Bowl, that's all you need. But of course, who didn't want that Super Mario World? Come on, one of the best games ever. So in order for me to get it, I was a baseball player at the time. I used to play pitcher and first baseman, and honestly, I wasn't that good of a pitcher, to be perfectly honest. But I made a bet with my dad. I just threw out something random. I said, Dad, what if I pitch a no-hitter? Would you buy me a Super Nintendo? And he just laughed, because he's like, son, there's no way you're gonna pitch a no-hitter, come on. Luckily, it was my turn to pitch a baseball game against the weakest team in the league. Now, I did go to Catholic school, so the caliber of athletes weren't always the strongest compared to public school. So I did get lucky, and yes, guys, I somehow, some way, pitched a no-hitter one game. Everybody was going crazy in the crowd. My dad was like, oh my God, I think the Nintendo was like 150 bucks at the time. I mean, the Super Nintendo was like 150 bucks. And I remember the parents say, oh my God, Dad, just 3 more outs and it could cost you $150 or $99, whatever it costs. But the people were chanting that. And yes, I did pitch the no-hitter. And yes, my dad did buy me that Super Nintendo, just proving that even the craziest things, if you really put your mind, heart, and soul to it, you can achieve it. Now for my final score for 8-Bit Christmas. I watched this movie on a Saturday morning with my wife, who's not a gamer, who didn't grow up as a Nintendo kid, and I can tell you, we both thoroughly enjoyed this movie. So when I went to go do my score, I was gonna give it a certain number score, but I said, you know what? I wanna go back and rewatch this movie a second time to really see if this is the score I wanna give this movie. And I can tell you guys, watching this movie a second time was even more fun than watching it the first time, probably because I missed some of the references from either laughing or smiling or just being in a nostalgia coma. So my final score for 8-Bit Christmas is gonna be a 9 out of 10. There's just a lot of great things to be had here. The story is great. The time period was awesome. 1988, Nintendo video games, plus these characters in this movie. Man, they are just so great, so fun, and it's so well acted that, guys, if you haven't watched 8-Bit Christmas, you should head over to HBO Max right now and check this movie out. Now, if you guys have already watched 8-Bit Christmas, what are your thoughts? Comment down below. And guys, if you like movie reviews like this, make sure you stay tuned in here to Toned In Entertainment for future videos.
Subscribe to the channel. Do it. Go now. Do it now.